Hope is something that Jordan and I came to in some ways kicking and screaming by the end of this project. But to us, hope is really about activity. It's about seeing the ways in which the world can be better and then acting to get there.
Welcome back to the DWD podcast, a podcast focused on ending polarization through conversation. This week, we're joined by two authors. We're very excited for this conversation to connect from one of our previous guests, Chris and Jordan. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having us, guys.
Of course. So to get things kick-started, for anyone who's not familiar with you both, could you just give us a little brief overview to what you've done in the past and the book that you just wrote?
Yeah, sure. I'll start off, then kick over to Chris. So I'm Jordan Blashek. I grew up in Los Angeles, California. I went off to Princeton University for college. While I was there, I got inspired by veterans coming home from the Iraq War and decided to join the Marine Corps. I spent 5 years as a Marine infantry officer. I did 2 tours overseas and then came back and went to law school where I met Chris.
Yeah. Hey. I'm Chris, and I too am from California. Went to UC Berkeley, writer through and through. Went to Washington to be a journalist. Ended up being a speechwriter. I worked in the Obama White House as an intern, and then at the State Department with John Kerry's team before deciding to go to law school, where I wanted to continue being a writer. Strangely enough, which I'm happy to tell you guys about if you have time on your hands, but. Serendipity would have it. I met Jordan Blashek, and the two of us went on a series of 6 road trips over 3 years and told stories from the road. And basically we're trying to find a way to talk across the aisle because I'm a Republican. Excuse me. I'm a Democrat. Wow, I'm going to be Jordan today. This is Chris. Yeah. I'm the Democrat and Jordan's a Republican. And we use these road trips as an attempt to sort of soothe the division and try to find a language that allowed us to kind of transcend our different party backgrounds.
So I want to start right there with how you both met, because one might say in this day and age that your friendship is kind of unlikely given your political differences. So how, or if you could tell us the specific moment between when you both met, what were your first impressions of each other? How did your conversations go? All that fun stuff.
Yeah, well, so we met at a bar, as so many great friendships start in grad school, and I imagine certain years in college as well. And my first impression of Jordan was that he was definitely a veteran. You can't spend time in DC without kind of being able to spot veterans coming. You know, it has a lot to do with the haircut, how they carry themselves, you know, that kind of thing. But he's also really warm. I mean, and in law school, it's kind of, you know, it can be really a stressful time for a lot of people, and that manifests in maybe not the best hangs ever. But Jordan was pretty relaxed, and you know, he was a year ahead of me, so in many ways, he took me under his wing. So I was quite grateful to Jordan early on. And what was remarkable is that in 2015, which feels like a very long time ago, it mattered a lot less, you know, who we voted for or what party we were part of at that point. It mattered more that we were interested in similar things, that we wanted adventurous lives, that we were both from California. These other sort of larger parts of who we were sort of at the forefront instead of politics. But Jordan, I bet you had a very different impression of me at the time.
Yeah, well, you know, Chris reminded me of a lot of friends back home growing up. Like he didn't take himself too seriously. He was wearing studded earrings and had long hair, and you know, a short sleeve button down, and all around us, the law students are very intense, and they're all so focused on their studies and ensuring that they're well positioned for their next job. And coming out of the Marines, I was looking for something a little different, and I found in Chris someone who you know, had a similar aspiration for life. Like we both wanted to live interesting lives. We both wanted to do things that were adventurous, but also meaningful. And we both felt passionately about our jobs at the State Department and Marine Corps, getting to represent the U.S. government and to be an arm of the U.S. policy, doing good around the world. And so I think those things united us. And you know, we knew the other was from the different party, but it just didn't matter back in 2015. And obviously in 2016, like things kind of changed a little bit, and the the atmosphere shifted. It certainly shifted at the law school. It just became a lot more tense, a lot more bickering. And as we got closer and closer to the election, I think Chris and I were both just very frustrated that our once like amazing conversations just kept getting derailed by politics. And so a lot of the inspiration for these trips in the book came out of this desire to get away from the shouting, to find where we could have deeper conversations and to learn something about the country that we felt was going through some weird cataclysmic turmoil that everybody was sort of surprised by.
For sure. How's your service with the United States as being part of the Marine Corps influenced you and your willingness to explore other people's beliefs, like what you had on this road trip? What made you so willing to do that?
Yeah, well, I think one of the amazing things about the Marine Corps and the U.S. military generally is that people come from all over the country, from all different backgrounds. They represent the incredible diversity of America. And as soon as you step foot into the Marine Corps, they shatter whatever identity you had before. They, physically, they shave your head. They like make you do, all these marches and indoctrinate you into a new culture. And then they build you back up with this ethos of, being a part of the U.S. military. And it's very powerful. And so what you're able to witness is all these Americans coming together from different backgrounds and building a common bond that is so strong that you go into combat and people literally run into gunfire for each other. And so it's a very powerful example of being able to bridge divides to come to something greater than the sum of the parts. And beyond that, once you're, fully in the Marines and you're now serving overseas, you really get to witness the best of Americans, and they all have different ideas and beliefs, and they might be Republicans or Democrats or independent or communists. It doesn't really matter. Like overseas, they do these incredible things for each other and for people we've never met. And so when you watch that, you're able to untangle someone's political beliefs from their incredible qualities as a person. And so I think for me, that was definitely something I took with me out on the road. It informs my worldview and my sense of what it means to be an American. And honestly, I think Chris's experience at the State Department gave him a similar sense. So he can share that. But I think we both had this sense that there's something unique about Americans and something beyond politics that you can find in every person.
Yeah. Chris, I'd love if you could speak to your experience as well at the State Department, what that, working as a speechwriter as well, how that influenced your willingness to go across the aisle, especially in conversations, and go on this road trip.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember when I was first interviewing for the job, my future boss, Steve, pitched the job to me as an opportunity to sort of transcend politics in many ways, that you could write a speech that quoted Reagan and Kennedy, in the same set of remarks. And that was really, really interesting to me. And it was something that attracted me to the job. And then getting in there and starting the work of being a very, very, very low level diplomat was true to that spirit. I mean, I worked with Republicans, I worked with Democrats, and we rarely ever spoke about it at work because what we were doing was diplomacy. America's role in the world was more important than who you had voted for in 2008 or 2012. There's this larger purpose to that. And, I was also, I got into politics based on the election of Barack Obama, and it feels like a lifetime ago. But in 2007, 2008, he was saying things like, there's no red states, there's no blue states, there's just the United States. And that was my first inkling of what it meant to be in politics, was this sort of larger message of a greater identity than, say, what divides us. And so getting to law school, I mean, one of the other great things about law school, and especially in sort of relation to Jordan's time in the Marines and my time at the State Department, was that law school is another one of those places where there are sort of higher ideals than, say, partisanship that animate our studies, that animate the profession. It's one of those places where Republicans and Democrats, conservatives, liberals, like Jordan said, communists or anything in between, are still attracted to the law and still attracted to it as a vessel of change or a vessel of holding up our democracy. So it did feel like we were quite lucky that we had these institutions in our background and that we met in this very particular place.
Both of you have these experiences serving our country, and that seems super unique, or at least something which a lot of people aren't exposed to. Would you say that that's a practical solution to ending modern day polarization? And if so, what are some practical ways in which people could take similar routes?
Jordan, you want to take it?
I'll start. I think so. I think service does a few things. Like one, it ties you to a greater mission and gives you, common ground with someone through that shared mission you might not have anything else in common with. So I think that's very powerful. I think it also, gets you thinking in a different way, as opposed to being very individualistic and looking at like, well, what's in this for me? You're thinking about, well, how can I make the community better or society better through tangible action? And so I think that's very important, and it strengthens those kind of civic bonds. So how do you make that real? I personally don't believe that like a national service requirement is something that would ever happen. I just don't think it squares with like the American ethos of autonomy and liberty. But I do think we can encourage it. So I think the government could subsidize programs that give people free college if they do a few years of service, or provide stipends to people who engage in a year of service. You could expand AmeriCorps and the Peace Corps and stuff like that. And so I'd be a huge fan of finding all these ways to incentivize that, so that, the best people across society are all like fighting and competing to get to, serve the country in various ways. That would be my 2 cents. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I like to joke that my favorite phrase these days is I agree with Jordan, but I really do. Yeah, I don't think conscription is the way to it, but those are such formative years right after college. I mean, college is formative in its own right. We all know that. But the first few years when you're really, truly out on your own and you don't have the superstructure of an academic environment behind you, or say if you don't go to college, those are really critical years in terms of defining who you are in this world, what you want out of it, what is a fulfilling career. And I think that that's a critical time to serve. The fact that I was in government for those years instead of doing anything else, whether it was writing and bumming around the country, which is what I ended up doing in my late 20s with Jordan, or any other kind of profession, it just wouldn't have left me with the same kind of values that I picked up in that particular institution. So I think if we can find a way to get more young people to serve in those years in particular, I think we'd have a much more vibrant citizenry. I think we'd see voting participation go up enormously. I think when you start to see the gears of government and the gears of society working, then you start to see your place in it. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly how to get there. I think smarter people than me have ideas, including Jordan, who's being humble right now. But yeah, I think it would be amazing if we could get more people to do that.
Transparency certainly seems to be one of those things that can excite a lot of people. But in particular, referencing your book, you, in a way, are being very transparent about what America looks like from your point of view on this trip that you went on. And what I'm most curious about is the disagreement that might have actually happened between you two as you're going on this trip. Were there any times that you had very strong disagreement after maybe speaking with someone that you've never met? And how did you make sure that didn't just derail the entire experience for you two of just calling everything a quits because you just butt heads too many times?
Yeah, I mean, the truth of the matter is that we fought like cats and dogs pretty much from the first few months of meeting each other to today. I mean, there's still times where we'll do like a book event and we'll get off the call and we'll be doing like a debrief, and then someone will say something. One of us will say something about what's going on in the country, and then we'll be right back at it, and it'll feel like 2016 again or 2007 on the road. Really like the context of your question, which is, when did this happen? Was it after you met someone, or, how did it go? And what was amazing to me is that we fought the most when we were sort of embodying ideas and parties and people that we weren't in the car and that we may have never met before. I was at my worst when I was just being a cutout version of a Democrat. I would imagine Jordan would say that he felt like he was being the worst version of himself when he was being a cutout version of a Republican. And that's when we fought, because it wasn't really about two friends talking anymore. It was about two people trying to represent an idea that they maybe didn't even have a full grasp of. And often when we had just talked to someone, that was when we were at our closest. That was when we were able to agree on so much, because it's almost impossible to meet someone and not understand more about their humanity and the way that they're articulating themselves and getting it. And so, when we were talking to Pete, a truck driver who we spent 5 days with, driving from Las Vegas to Louisiana, who wore a "Make America Great Again" shirt for I think 4 out of 5 of those days. Jordan and I agreed a ton, even though here we are talking to this Trump voter. Because when you actually spend time with someone, when you get to know them, when you let them articulate themselves and get into how they got to where they are and the beliefs that they hold, then it's a lot harder to hate one another or yell at one another or misunderstand. And that maybe that speaks to the importance of transparency. It speaks to the importance of shared facts, shared experience, going to the scene. But yeah, Jordan and I were always at our worst, always fighting when we were kind of further away from Americans than when we were closer to them. Yeah. Does that track with your your memory of it, Jordan?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it seems like you guys have done something which is almost impossible nowadays, and it's break past party lines to become friends. And I think, that's what it was like maybe 10, 20 years ago. I think maybe prior to the 2016 election, but now the case just isn't the same. Though one of the biggest aspects of polarization, which at least I've noticed, is generationally. You guys seem to be of the same age. Again, you said that he was a year older than you in terms of his studies, so you're basically on the same track at the same age. But do you think that this aspect of like depolarizing and looking past partisan politics can still apply to somebody who's 80 years old and a person who's 20 years old having a conversation with each other?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the most important thing I think Chris and I figured out was that, nobody, when they think about like, who do I want to be in this world? Like, what are the most important things about who I am? Nobody says like, I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican. And yet, we label someone as like, if he's a Republican, there's no way I will have anything in common with this person. But if you ask them, like, what do you think defines you? Like, what are your deeper values? What are the experiences in your life that you think speak to who you really are? I guarantee you'll find something in there that you resonate with, or you realize like, oh, wow, like me and this person, we actually share a lot, even if we view, things like the right way to approach immigration or how to handle, abortion. You might disagree on those issues, but you have these deeper things there. And I think that's true across generations too. I think the important thing is to be humble enough to realize that someone might have had very different life experiences. And so they might not like treat an issue with the same language or sensitivity that you treat it with. They might approach an issue with a different perspective given the experiences they've had, and to be humble enough to say like, okay, they might use a word that I find objectionable, or they might have said something that I think is a little insensitive, but have some humility and grace to say like, well, that's okay. I can still engage with this person and learn from them just as they might learn from me. And I think the big mistake we make in politics today is we shut off the debate because we're like, oh, that person must have views that are objectionable, instead of saying, well, what can I learn? And in learning, can I share something in turn that this person might grow from? And someone who's 80 can grow just as much as someone who's 20, and we should be willing to learn from each other, because there's incredibly valuable experiences on both sides that make us better as a society.
Definitely, yeah. What you're harping on here, I think, is really important for anyone listening, and also for myself, and just reflecting, is that it almost comes down to still needing to be willing to grow. And I think in this point in time, people are so entrenched in their beliefs and so fixed that they cannot shift, or they don't think it's possible even to begin with. That being said, in your experiences when you're traveling across the country, aside from you two and possibly even changing your beliefs throughout the trip, did you notice that even just in short conversations that you were having with people that they began to change? And if so, how were they changing?
That's a really interesting question. The nature of this project was mobile. We were in and out pretty quickly. We spent some time with some people. We spent some quality time with a few people like Pete, who I mentioned earlier, the truck driver. Those are some intensive days. Truck drivers drive for hours on end, like 12, 15 hours a day. And then when they're not driving, they're usually, talking around a truck stop. So it's a lot of intensive time, and absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure if I would say we saw him changing, before our very eyes, but I do think that he would show us his vulnerabilities and show us the places where he wasn't so sure of himself. And, we were able to do the same. And that's a moment of exchange. I mean, and this is one of the lessons that we're trying to carry forward with this project, which is that, things are extremely complex, and you learn a ton. You're able to make the world seem big in a great way when you actually are talking across the aisle. You're talking to people with different life experiences, like Jordan was saying, and there's a lot to be learned even from people who maybe think entirely different than you do. And Pete was exactly one of those kinds of characters for us. I mean, he had an entirely different background. He used language that, I might not have, coming from Berkeley or from Yale. But there was so much, he was just dripping with intelligence and wisdom from a very different way. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know if we finished P. I don't know if we saw him really moving per se, but we absolutely were able to like talk in these intimate ways. And that's actually another one of these lessons, which is that if you can find a way to talk in like intimate and vulnerable spaces instead of places with a big platform or a spotlight on you or an audience, then you're far more likely to say things like, I don't know this, I'm not convinced yet. I think this is right. I've been told this is right. It feels right, but I don't know. And then that's a space where you can actually change a little bit.
And, just to add to that, I do think one thing we saw over and over again was the way we approached people really mattered. And this was dramatized for us by the lobstermen we spent time with in Maine. So lobstermen in Maine are historically or notoriously suspicious of everybody. They hate tourists. They really hate people who just come to like gawk at them and take pictures. And they're an industry that they feel is like, it's their own little like secluded part of society, and they operate kind of on the frontiers. And we really wanted to explore the lobster industry for a few reasons. Chris had taken a course on it in law school. It's come up in the trade war with China, and we get there and we get told over and over again that there's no way the lobstermen will talk to you. They just won't trust you. And so, what Chris and I did was we actually ended up finding this guy. And, at first he was sort of suspicious. He didn't really want to talk to us. And we just kind of offered to help. Like we helped him when he was doing repairs on his boat. We helped him go get bait for the lobster traps. We pitched in, we lent a hand, and we started building up some trust with him. And by the end of the day, when he was like, wow, you guys actually like pulled your weight, he opened up and he said, why don't you guys come over and have dinner with me? And it was over dinner in the intimate setting that Chris described that we were actually able to get like real insight into this guy's life and worldview and how he thought about things. And, we abstract that to, how our countrymen and women should approach each other. We have to build trust with each other again. There's so little trust across the aisle. There's so little faith that, the other side is looking for, the best of America, and so are we. And as a result, we don't trust their intentions. And so we just have to go about building trust in various ways with each other again. And it's those little things, those little acts of kindness and generosity and helpfulness that end up doing that.
Mm-hmm. It's hard for my generation to build trust in the political sphere because at least from my experience, I've never had trust in it to begin with. Mm. And so through that same token of thought, how do we build trust when there hasn't been any trust experienced before?
It's a good question. I mean, my 2 cents on it is, to get engaged. And it's very easy to like sit on the sideline and pick at like, oh, well, this isn't what I want it to be, or that's not what I want it to be. But it's different when you actually put skin in the game. And I think, Chris and I, having spent time in the government, I think we view things differently. You see where people with the best of intentions sometimes don't get the best outcome because the world's complex. It's hard. There's many issues at play and many stakeholders to manage. And, sometimes bureaucracies are slow for a reason. But it doesn't mean that, they're not trying, or it's worth engaging with. And so, my biggest 2 cents is to put skin in the game and see if you, through service can start building up a sense of duty and civic commitment.
Yeah. If I could jump in, that makes me sad. I came of political age, like I said earlier, with Barack Obama, which, whatever you think of the man and the presidency, if you were 17, 18 at the time, there was this feeling of trust, and there's this feeling of belief and engagement, and that the world reflected, the larger world reflected my world, my small world. And that was critically important for, my time over the last, 4 years. It's been a sort of an anchor to my worldview as things have gotten so terrible this last year, is that sort of political maturation moment. And so the fact that, like that you say that and that question is now so pertinent and so present, that, how do you create trust where there never was any? What I want to say in part is that things change. I think you can look at moment and how things have changed and see it changing for the worse. You can see it changing for the better, depending on who you are. But it's also just change, and change means that, like, trust is possible, because if it doesn't exist now, it maybe existed before. I hope that Jordan and I can also show a little bit that other generations can carry that torch forward, and maybe show you. And other generations, future generations, that it's possible, right? And that's why I think Jordan's advice about engagement is so critical. I mean, it might be kind of a bitter pill right now, engagement. It doesn't really feel like it's one-to-one. You put 1 unit of engagement in, you get 1 unit of trust back. But every time you engage, you get closer to bringing back that trust in our larger system. And I would like to flip that around to you guys as well. I mean, you guys have been having these conversations. Do you see any hope for building trust again? I mean, Jordan and I have our own opinions, right? And we've had these experiences driving across all these states and talking to all these people. But really what matters is, like, your guys' generation and your guys' perspective, because, Jordan and I are going to be old and gone pretty soon here, and you guys are going to be in charge.
Hopefully not that soon, because we definitely need folks like you to stay around and guide us in this process. But what I would say to your question is, I almost feel like Joey and I, in our own project with this, have virtually traveled not just only across the country, but across the world. We've spoken to people from England. We have listeners all across the world now in over 55 countries. And they reach out to us and they talk to us about how they, too, are experiencing what we are noticing in the United States, which might say something a little bit harsh about how the American ideal applies to the rest of the world, especially when we're not living up to those ideals. Nevertheless, though, I do think that there's a lot of hope. And I think that what we have noticed in our own conversations is that there are so many change makers, including Thanasi, who connected us, that the beautiful part of our system is it's based off of how we feel and how we act. And so we live in a very different place, and we shouldn't, in my opinion, take it for granted that we live in a democracy or a republic, whichever one you want to choose to name it by. Because just a few generations ago, for Joey and I in particular, our parents are from Soviet Russia. And we have friends from all across the world who have lived under either totalitarian regimes or under no government whatsoever. And the fact that we have a government that actually, in theory, and in many times in practice, operates based off of how the people feel is still a very unique and new phenomenon. And it's all an experiment. Like, if we don't engage, then the experiment can cripple. It's not like it's something that's set in stone. So I am right there with you as to how to change this process. And even if it is a hard pill to swallow, just my main thing to anyone who's listening, who's around our age or who is even older, is just pick one thing that you care about. Like for Joey and I, it was, we really care about polarization and its impact as it underlies all the variety of issues that we're experiencing. Mm-hmm. And so we decided, okay, how can we go about and try and resolve that? We noticed that conversations were a very powerful way to at least change the dial 1 degree. But people can take any sort of issue. If you care about plastic waste, try and get involved. You have wherever in your location, wherever you are right now, even virtually, to assist, to get involved, and to make your voice heard.
Mm-hmm. I think I'm a firm believer that hope is only useful if it's democratized. And unfortunately, at least the way that I see it, you turn on the TV and it's not, speeches from MLK, it's Donald Trump yelling at somebody or Biden not being able to finish a sentence. I mean, it's just what we see is almost like what our reality is. And it doesn't seem like figures who are providing hope to the public are put on a pedestal, or the pedestal which they should be put on. Mm-hmm. To your point about political engagement as a young person, it's super difficult, at least when I'm sitting in a classroom, because the conversations aren't about politics. It's about, do you watch Fox News or MSNBC? And that dictates what your perspective is. It's not about politics. It's about media. And so I think that until we stray away from that, look at the facts, look at the data, and identify our real political ideologies, until we do that, we won't really have any sense of hope. But that just requires education. That's just my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, you guys could have written Union from the sound of things. I mean, so many of the ideas that we are writing about and that sort of animated our journey are exactly what you guys just said. I mean, the importance of democracy, the importance of this being an experiment. And, if you don't lean in, then we lose said experiment and it's all over. I mean, democracy is young, like you said. I mean, it's ancient and it's young, and especially American democracy. And look, I mean, I just want to underline one thing you guys were talking about, which is hope. And hope is something that Jordan and I came to, in some ways kicking and screaming by the end of this project. But to us, hope is really about activity. It's about seeing the ways in which the world can be better and then acting to get there. We define optimism as the sort of blind belief, blind faith that the world will get better if I just wait long enough. And that, I think, we're sort of getting rid of in our politics. That there's almost no place for that in democracy, right? Because democracy is activity. And to your point, I mean, I love that you guys say that you virtually traveled the world and traveled the country, because that's the only way you can right now. Mm-hmm. But we were on the road and we found the same thing. We found hope where people were putting in sweat equity, that were saying, I see something ugly or I see something I don't like, and I'm going to find a solution. And it might feel like an impossibility, but I'm going to do it nonetheless because I care, and I'm going to do it. And I think there's something about that sort of irrational hope almost, that I'm just going to keep putting work into it. That's going to be the engine that gets us out of this mess. And it's so unfair, and like I said, it's a bitter pill, but there are good people doing that, and that's what really allowed Jordan and I to finish this book, with the word hope within the last 4 words. It's something that really matters to us, that we're really passionate about.
Certainly. To come to a little bit of a close, I'd love to touch a little bit more on what you learned about yourself in this process, because as much as you're learning about America, I think the book also goes into how you're changing and what you're learning about yourself. So what kind of takeaways around your own identity, the way that you think, the way you think of yourself in particular, did you take away from this process, especially in reflecting on it while writing the book?
Well, maybe I think I'll start. And the thing I think I learned through these conversations with Chris, were that sometimes I can kind of prioritize winning an argument rather than feeling what's going on the other side. So often in our fights, I would say something and probably hit Chris in a certain way, and it caused some pain because of friends or family that he thought were being targeted by whatever argument I was making. And I would ignore that pain because I was so focused on winning the argument. And I was trying to marshal facts and information on my side to overpower him. And in doing so, I kind of would lose the dramatic fights between us. And it was that blind spot for how my words could cause an emotional reaction and some pain in a friend, that was leading to a lot of our fights. And it was only after that blind spot was kind of revealed to me by Chris that we started having these much better conversations, because I was sensitive to the fact that, anything we say, any political argument is emotionally laden. There's going to be a reaction on the other side. And so, being able to understand and empathize allowed me to listen and to ask questions and to be humble about, the experience Chris had that he was bringing to that policy issue. In the end, I think it's made me a much better person. And Chris deserves credit for that.
So that last bit was a little hard to say, huh?
Yeah, it got stuck on my tongue.
No, and I feel quite similarly. I'm much humbler as a human being since these trips. Jordan has revealed to me that there is no monopoly on truth when it comes to where you're from or what institutions you've been part of or what you believe. That this is a complex world that you can never really fully put your arms around and say, I get it. I know, I understand the magic behind, the modern experience. And if you don't have friends who challenge you, who think differently than you do, who are willing to point out ideas that they maybe disagree with and why, then the world's going to be small, and that's comforting, but you're never going to actually get closer to, moving your arms a little bit closer to wrapping around understanding. And Jordan gave me that. Like Jordan said, he's not shy when it comes to pointing out flaws in his friends' arguments, and that's a real virtue. And it's a real virtue to be wrong sometimes and to learn and to say like, help me. I had a mentor in writing and journalism who said the most powerful phrase is can you help me? And to have a friend who's able to hear that and not see weakness and then offer help, is an amazing moment of growth and coming into adulthood in some ways. So thanks, bud. Appreciate you.
I think that's a fantastic way to wrap this episode up. But before we finish and end the recording, guys, we want to roll the red carpet out for you virtually, of course. Where can the people find your book and also keep up to date with what you're working on?
Totally. Well, so we have a website, unionthebook.com, which should remind you to update it. So by the time you hear this, it'll be nice and new and updated and sparkling. You can find Union, a Democrat, a Republican, and a Search for Common Grounds on bookshop.org or Amazon. There's a great service called IndieBounds, where if you Google the name of the book and put in your zip code, it'll shoot you over to an indie bookstore so you can support small business at a time like this and also support us. And yeah, we're on Twitter, we're elsewhere, we're old millennials, but we're doing our best. And yeah, we're around, and we'd love to keep this conversation going with all your listeners.
Fantastic. Really appreciate it, guys. Anyone who's listening, certainly hope you do go pick up the book. That's all for this week on the Debate Without Debate podcast. We will see you next time. Until then, peace.
Peace.
Jordan and Chris, that was fantastic.